When it comes to writing fiction and storytelling, it's best to think of it as a bit of a tapestry. Yes, you do have your one main plot, but you also have a bunch of other smaller threads that, when weaved together, come together to cohesively form a shirt or novel. Now, you may be thinking, well, does that mean I have to write a bunch of small stories as well as a big story? And yeah, long story short, pretty much. Well, that may be a daunting task, but there's no need to worry because I got you covered. How's it going, guys? It's Pat, your friendly internet wordsmith, and for today's video, I'm going to be breaking down my advice on how to write subplots. Tip number 1, make sure your subplot ties back into your main plot. Have you ever been reading a book or watching a movie or TV or whatever, and yeah, the party of heroes, they're on some magical quest to I don't know, slay an evil dragon, prevent the world from burning, something to that effect. And somewhere along the journey, they get sidetracked, they're off in a village somewhere, and yeah, you just get chapter upon chapter upon chapter of this party just not really doing anything to progress their main quest of stopping this ancient dragon. It's a pretty universal opinion that this does indeed suck truckloads of ass, and not in the good way, between two consenting adults. Yeah, usually this is the result of including a subplot in your book that has little or nothing to do with the main quest on hand. And the most common defenses for this are that, yeah, if it's entertaining enough, your readers will overlook it, or you really need to up the word count of your book, and a subplot is going to be the best way to lengthen that. Yeah, don't fall for this excuse. If you manage to hook a reader and you get them invested in your work, and they're reading, they're having a good time, don't take that good faith and then jerk them around by serving them up something else entirely. And the key word in this sentence is something else entirely. The trick to writing engaging subplots is to make them different enough to where they, feel like a slice of variety in contrast to the main plot, but they're similar enough to where they don't feel, just like needless filler, and can be, cut from the story entirely and you wouldn't skip a beat. The best way to achieve this is to write a subplot that is integral to the main plot. For example, let's take our earlier quest of, slaying this evil villainous dragon. And let's say you want to include a romantic subplot into the story. Now, yeah, you don't want to just, have your main character going on this quest and somewhere along the lines they fall in love, and, you take a detour from the story to tell that your MC is falling in love for the first time. That's easy mode, and, your readers might not enjoy, the departure from the main adventure to, go into your main character's love life. Instead, relate the relationship back to the main plot by, I don't know, let's say the love interest is related to the dragon in some way, or maybe the only way to defeat the dragon would mean sacrificing the love interest. By doing something like this, you make your story more enticing by including a more juicy subplot that never really feels like a deviation from the main plot, because everything that happens within the subplot will directly affect the main plot, so never any time wasted there. Tip number 2, make sure the subplots don't overshadow the main plot. Your subplots should never be so grand that they outshine the main plot, and if they do, you frankly have a serious problem and you're gonna have a lot of work to do. The purpose of a subplot is to offer variety in a story and, give your readers a slight break while digesting the core story. It's kind of good to think of it like, eating a meal. Your steak will be, your main plot, and, your mashed potatoes, your veggies, your dinner roll, those are all your subplots. Now, if you're eating dinner and yeah, these side dishes are, you know, more appealing and more satisfying than your main dish, then that's a problem. What you want to do is have your subplots, you know, complement your main plot. And this is why, you know, romantic subplots are so common. It's because, yeah, romance is, you know, the slower paced, a lot more lovey-dovey, and it's a perfect contrast to faster paced, balls to the wall action, you know, but you never want that, you know, romance to overshadow the action. If your romantic subplot is more interesting than the main plot in your fantasy work, yeah, you're probably better off just letting that romantic subplot take center stage and building that more up. And yeah, just writing, say, a romance novel with fantasy elements. On to tip number 3, make good use of your side characters. Now, the cast of your book is entirely up to you. However, it's generally a good idea to only include as many characters as are necessary. Because, yeah, the more characters that you include in a book, the more you're asking your readers to remember. Yeah, if you have a bunch of characters that, you know, they don't really do too much, but what they do is integral to the plot, it's probably best to just, you know, axe all the extra characters and only keep one around, and, you know, have that one character fill all those different small roles, which, you know, in turn will make that one role, you know, a little more valuable. And that way you don't have, you know, just a bunch of floating characters. In terms of the subplot, remember that each side character is an additional opportunity to tell another narrative that may or may not jive right with the protagonist. You know, it may not, you know, fit right from their perspective. Now, a wonderful example of this comes in, you know, Into the Spider-Verse. And spoiler warning for those of you who have not seen the movie yet, although the movie is fucking amazing. So get off your ass and go see it, I guess. Now that you've been adequately warned, throughout the movie, there's a continuing subplot involving Peter B. Parker and his fear of having children, which leads to a lot of tragic happenings, you know, most notably losing his drive and losing the love of his life, Mary Jane. Fundamentally, the main plot and subplot are two totally different stories. Miles Morales needs to learn how to become Spider-Man. Meanwhile, Peter B needs to overcome his fear of having children. You get two stories here, but what makes this truly amazing is how these two stories intersect. At first, Peter B is a shitty mentor to Miles. However, in overcoming his issues, he not only, you know, learns how to be a good mentor to Miles and, you know, teach him how to become Spider-Man, but he also learns, you know, that he can be a good father and has a renewed vigor to go back to his own dimension and fix all the problems in his life. In other words, despite being two different stories, Peter B's subplot directly supports Miles' main plot because, yeah, without Peter B getting his shit together to be a good mentor for Miles, Miles would never learn how best to become Spider-Man and learn to take that leap of faith. And of course, Peter B's subplot is never center stage long enough to overshadow the main story we're being told about Miles and, you know, him becoming Spider-Man. It's the perfect use of a side character. Tip number 4, make sure your subplot is paced correctly. Pacing in general is super important, but when it comes to writing subplots, it's crucial. Yeah, it's best to, you know, weave your subplots and main plots together. I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but it's better to weave these together than, say, you know, segment a subplot off, in which, you know, you're going through the main plot and yeah, you just break away to go through a subplot real quick, and then you get back to the main plot. Don't do that. Now, this may sound a lot like tip 1, but this is completely different. Tip 1 is all about making sure your subplots are relevant to the main plot and that they're not, a waste of time. Tip 4 is all about making sure your subplots are adequately spaced throughout your story. Just want to be clear about that. Subplots are not nearly as long as your main plot, but they're still going to cover, you know, a considerable amount of space on the page. Now, if you're writing a fantasy story and yeah, your heroes embark on a quest and they breeze into town, your main character gets distracted, falls in love, and for the next 20 chapters, you're just covering those romantic endeavors. Yeah, even if this, you know, as we said before, this subplot ties into the main plot and it's relevant, yeah, you're still gonna piss your readers off because they didn't sign up for this. They signed up for epic fantasy adventure, not a season of The Bachelor. You only ever want to deviate from the main plot to focus solely on a subplot every so often. And even when you do, there are two crucial things that you have to always remember. The first one being that you need to always, within the chapter, at some point, probably at the end of it, you need to tie the chapter back to the main plot in some way. Now, it doesn't have to be a big way, it just needs to be relevant. If your characters are, say, on a date somewhere, at the end of the chapter, interrupt their fun by, you know, revealing some new information that, you know, furthers the plot along. And yeah, write it in such a way that, yeah, your characters would never come across this information had they not been out on this date or something to that effect. And the other thing is, you never want to spend more than a few chapters at a time breaking away from your main plot to focus solely on a subplot. Even if at, you know, the end of the chapter you tie it back to the main plot, which again you should always be doing, it's still a deviation from the main plot. And generally speaking, the more time you spend away from, you know, your main core story telling side stories, the more you risk upsetting your reader. And finally, tip number 5, you gotta know when enough is enough. Like everything in life, you need to know when to call it quits. As we said earlier, yeah, subplots are the #1 way to add content and words onto the page. By far, best way to do it. If you're an underwriter, this is gonna help you out tremendously. And by underwriter, I mean, you know, if you struggle to, you know, write a book and it meet a certain word count, this is going to help you tremendously to include a subplot to your book. Do it. However, don't fall into the trap of, you know, just writing a shitload of subplots in your book. Yeah, think of it as a juggling act. Yeah, the more subplots you try to include in your book, the harder it is to pull everything off successfully. If you're writing a story with, say, 10 subplots, that's basically 11 stories you're trying to tell all at once. This translates to a plethora of characters and events and just a bunch you're gonna have to write. And keep in mind that every subplot you write should also advance the plot, tie into the main plot, and yeah, shouldn't overshadow the main plot, and should never take center stage for too long. And that's not to mention that you also are asking your readers to keep up with all of this shit. So yeah, what might end up happening is your readers just deciding that it's not worth the effort. And that's gonna do it for this video, guys. Catch you in the next one.
Thanks for kicking it with us. If you had a good time, go ahead and slap that like button. And if you're new, consider subscribing, because we do this every week. Of course, you're going to want to hit that bell too so you never miss an upload. Have an awesome day, achieve something great, and we'll catch you later.